Mick, fantastic to have you. How are you doing?
Yeah, all good, and thanks for the invite. Much appreciated.
No, not at all. As with all military guests, I'm always fascinated about what it was throughout their childhood that ultimately drew them to the military. So, exactly that. What was it?
I tell you what, really bizarre. So my father was in the military. Not a distinguished military career. He was Royal Signals, and that's no disrespect to the Royal Signals of the world. But we were based in predominantly Germany. And in Germany at the time, so the 70s, as I was growing up, a lot of the military were hardcore drinkers because they'd been in Germany for quite a while. And the regiment that my father was attached to had been in the same location for 18 years. So quite a strong um, drinking culture. So it didn't inspire me at all to join the military. But what I did do is I was a very good football player, soccer player. And every school that I went to, bear in mind I went to 14 different schools through moving about within the military. I ended up in the football team, which was a really good way of making friends because, as you can imagine, moving round, it's quite difficult to re-establish friendships with people because you're an outsider. But being a decent footballer, that got me into it. So I had no interest at all joining the military. Because there was nothing there to inspire me. So when my mother and father divorced in 1974, we came back to Lincolnshire because me and my brother and my sister stayed with my mum. Came back to Lincolnshire, and I just took up football again. And the headmaster of the school in Lincolnshire got me a trial with Lincoln City, of all teams, down at Sisselbank in Lincoln. And unfortunately, I played left back. Even though I'm right-footed, I always played left back. And in the trial, we were quite a strong side. So we were always attacking. There was nothing really for me to shine at, really, if that makes sense. So my number never got called out on my bib. And I just left there totally distraught because all I ever wanted to be was a footballer. So at 15 and a half, I then decided that Lincolnshire, there's not a lot to offer in Lincolnshire. It was either being a bricklayer, farmer, mechanic, the sort of normal trades that go about, and then I just thought, sod it, I'll join the military, and was lucky enough to go to the recruiting centre in Grimsby, and there just happened to be a quite a large paratrooper sat at the desk, and fantastic bit of salesmanship because he had a picture directly behind him of people jumping out of a C-130 Hercules, an aircraft. And I looked at that and thought, yeah, that's for me. So literally, it was off a cuff, not inspired by a father who'd been in the military for years. It was just looking at this burly paratrooper sat at a recruiting desk with a picture behind him, and that's what inspired me to join.
How quickly did you find the void that you'd lost per se, or that you felt you were in from not having the football career that you'd hoped for, filled by the process of joining the Paras?
Oh, to be honest, I was pretty devastated. You can imagine as a young kid, that's your ambition, and that's all I ever. And to the extent that I never ever once finished a cross country run. The school cross country runs you used to do and the athletics. I had no interest whatsoever because I went everywhere with the football under my arm, and that's all I ever did. And it was really bizarre because when I actually did join the military, and at 16, young kid still, the very first thing that we did when we got down to Aldershot and joined the junior paras was they had a massive cross country run, over 10 miles. And I'd never done a 10 miler in my life. and came second. So straight away, instantly regretted not taking the running side of it serious when I was growing up. So the void, as you mentioned, probably lasted about 3 months from being told I can't be a footballer to leaving school to then deciding that I was going to join the military.
Fantastic, fantastic. So 1978 to 1986 was sort of the journey, really, and it went from paratrooper to commando to special forces, didn't it? So without obviously being too whistle-stop tour, because a lot happens in that time period, do you want to just talk us through what your career looked like in that span before we focus a little bit more on the selection and special forces side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bit weird because so I joined the Junior Parachute Regiment and ended up in a gymnastic platoon because being a young fit lad, and I was also in the football team, brilliant. But I joined gymnastic platoon and purely because they used to tour the country doing all these gymnastic displays. And in 1976 we did we went to Ipswich, Portman Road, and did a demonstration on the pitch before Ipswich beat Man United 1-0. And then we did the Wembley Cup final, which was Southampton versus Manchester United again, with Southampton winning 1-0. And I'm pretty sure that Man United hated the sight of us because both times we did the demonstration, they lost 1-0. So I did that really. Um, got really engraved in the parachute regiment culture, which was very not forgiving of anybody who was not a paratrooper, if that makes sense. This has a bearing on a decision. So when I went through normal basic training to be a paratrooper, we got to about week 15. So we'd done the P company side of it. Got to week 15, and we were just about to go to Wales to do a thing called Advanced Wales, which is a 3-week exercise. Doing normal stuff, outdoor stuff, ambushes and patrols and all that sort of thing. But we decided to do a 10-mile run before we went, and on this run, the instructors decided to have a bit of fun. As they used to do in 1976, 77. And they asked us to jump off a tank burn, and it was in Aldershot, a place called Hankley Common, where a lot of tanks used to go through there. And so we all jumped off, and when it was my turn to jump off, when I landed, I just heard an almighty crack, and basically I snapped my ankle. So, not having any medical facility in the area, I was carried back to Browning Barracks in Aldershot, and then sent up to the Cambridge Military Hospital. And what they did was they manipulated my ankle back into place. And I stayed in hospital for 2 weeks. They then X-rayed the ankle. Found out that it hadn't knitted as well as what they thought it would do, and decided to pin my ankle. So that then put another 6 weeks, 8 weeks or so onto rehabilitation. And then at the end of it, they decided or a doctor decided that I couldn't parachute anymore because of the pin in my ankle, and my options were go and join um, another organisation, an infantry unit, and I wasn't for that, because I'd been indoctrinated as a youngster that it was parachute regiment or nothing. I made the mistake of leaving the army, and it was a massive mistake because 6 months later I reapplied, went to the same recruiting office back in Grimsby, because I'd got a really good report from my time in the parachute regiment. But on there was this big stamp that said you can't parachute, so they recommended joining a commando unit. and the only army commando units at the time was the Royal Artillery and the Royal Engineers. So I decided to join the Royal Artillery, and ended up joining 29 Commando up in Arbroath, Scotland, for my sins. Bizarrely, I found as a youngster, 16, the para course, P Company, which is the selection process of being in the Parachute Regiment, extremely hard. And I actually found the Commando course, now that I was 2 years older, a lot easier. And I was trying to explain that to people, that as a youngster, your body completely changes from a young sort of 17-year-old to nearly 19-year-old. You know, it's your physicality completely changes. So I actually found the Commander course quite easy going, if that makes sense, and ended up into the Black Sheep battery, because 29 Commando at the time were based in Plymouth. And everybody loved it down there. That's why they got posted to Plymouth. But they had two batteries. One battery was up in Arbroath, Scotland, and nobody wanted to go get posted up in Scotland. But I volunteered purely because Sem battery were due to go on a Northern Ireland tour to South Armagh with 4-1 Commando at the time, before they went into suspended animation. And it was their final tour. So I just wanted to go to Northern Ireland, so I volunteered. So 3 of us went up to Arbroath. We did the Northern Ireland trip. Very fortunate enough, in 1982, I ended up in the Falklands. Quite an active time, really, because I was never on the guns in the artillery. I've never actually fired one of the big artillery pieces. I've always been lucky enough to be at the other end, directing the gunfire onto targets. So during the Falklands, I got embedded with 4-5 Commando. So we did the Yomper Cross, as they call it, the Tabber Cross, as we now call it in the SAS. But unfortunately, so my pin in my ankle that I had put in, I totally forgot about. And just before the Falklands, I went for a run, and my ankle was really stiff. So they X-rayed it and said, "Oh, you got a pin in your ankle." And I went, "Yeah, well, yeah." And they said, "Well, that should have been taken out after 18 months." But that 18-month period was when I actually left the military. So I, being a numpty, I totally forgot about it, if that makes sense. So they decided to send me down to Woolwich, to the military hospital down in Woolwich, to get the pin taken out. And unfortunately, they couldn't get it out because it'd been in so long now. So all they did was they buried it slightly deeper. But this had an impact when I was in the Falklands, because in the Falklands the ground was very soft. It was peat bog, basically, and my ankle started to get a bit septic and gammy and everything else. Where it'd been re-stitched up and stuff like that. So just before we did the battles, Two Sisters specifically, there was a lull in the fighting, so I decided to go down before the actual battle started. We were on a place called Mount Kent, sort of waiting ready for the planning phase for the big attacks. And one of the guys on the patrol said, "Listen, Mick, why don't you go down and get your ankle strapped up, and then we'll be good to go." So I went down to the Royal Marine medical aid post, and there was a senior surgeon down there who wanted me to pack my bags and send me offshore to the Uganda, which was the hospital ship. But not. There's no way in hell I was going to walk all the way to the battle sites and not be involved in that. So I politely declined his suggestion, unbeknown to me that a day later he came tracking me down, trying to find me, and threatened me with all sorts of, refusing an order and all this sort of malarkey. But thankfully, there was a major, the battery commander, who's a major. He just happened to be fairly close by when he came up to our position and said, "Listen, he's walked this far. He's got it strapped up. He's happy. It's his decision. Let him crack on." So thankfully, they allowed us to carry on. We did all the attacks, and everything else all went tickety boo, if that makes sense. But when we came back on the Canberra, rather than enjoying life, as everybody was doing on the Canberra, I ended up in the sick bay for the whole 10 days of sailing back, purely because the ankle had gone really septic, and we were on antibiotics and stuff like that. So bit of a setback, but I achieved what I wanted to do, and that was, go on a proper deployment, and finish it right to the very end, and not be one of these people that goes sick in a war zone, because I have no time for people, because people join the army for a reason, and that's to go and fight wars. So going sick, for me, was not even an option. So yeah, so quite happy. So finish that, and it's really the Falklands that I started to have thoughts about going to special forces, if that makes sense, because you had two of the squadrons that were down in the Falklands, plus the SBS were down there as well. And it was really down there that I started having thoughts about moving on. And the thing that pushed it for me really was 1985. We were we had our year sort of planned out. We were going to do 3 months in Norway, because Norway was our sort of deployment every year, doing the Arctic warfare role. We also knew that we were going to be doing a summer tour somewhere. We've been to Australia, places like that, Kenya. And it just got to the point that you could plan your year in advance, 2 years ahead. And for me, that wasn't what I joined the military for. And then the other thing as well is I'm not the best camp soldier. I don't like bullshit. I don't like marching. I don't like saluting. Don't like calling people sir. I actually prefer being in the field. Being mucky, dirty, grimy, and just getting on with it. If that makes sense. So that was another push for me, incentive to maybe move on into the SF world.
I can imagine the experiences that you had in the Falklands and touring Northern Ireland. You can go. I can only imagine again, having not been anywhere near either of those places in those times, having not even existed, in fact, at those times. But that can go either way. You can either be pushed forwards and inspired, as you were, to think forwards, or potentially be intimidated and think, this is where I belong, this is where I shall stay, this is what I can tolerate. So with the attitude that you had, was that unique with the people you were fighting alongside, or was there a real galvanized attitude that came from the lads you were around to move forwards?
No, because we're only a little 4-man team. So my other thinking really was, if I was to now leave, and go, it would mean that the three other people are doing a 4-man's work, if that makes sense. So for me, there was no option in my mind. I wasn't going to leave my three comrades to do a job that they actually needed four people to do. So for me, it was an easy decision. No, I'm not going. I'm going to be staying here and just get on with it. If that makes sense. And the other thing is, the Chabba Cross, or the Yompa Cross, as the Marines call it, was actually quite harsh, quite hard going. Not, it wasn't, it wasn't a major drama. But for some, it was quite hard going. Now, because of the pin in my ankle, I had different boots on. to everybody else, because where the pin is in my ankle, I couldn't wear short leg boots. And just before the Falklands, or in the build up, all the Royal Marines and the attached people, i.e. the artillery boys, all got issued these fancy climbing boots, if that makes sense, and really comfy and really good, but no good for me because the top of the boot coincided with where the pin was in my ankle, so did a lot of rubbing. So I decided to use Northern Ireland patrol boots. Now Northern Ireland patrol boots, you only have to look at them and they get wet. But the good thing is, so my feet were soaking wet for the whole duration. Hence, the pin and the ankle side of it started to go a bit gammy. But the good thing about the boot is that at night time they dried out really quick, whereas the fancy boots that everybody else had um, took quite a long time before you actually did get wet. But once the boots did get wet, they very difficult to dry out, and that's why a lot of the Marines went down with trench foot, bizarrely. Whereas somebody wearing flip flops, patrol boots, managed to get away with it. Less for my ankle, but like I say, the ankle was an open wound. Because of what happened just before the Falklands, and there was no bandage was ever going to keep out the water from the ground, if that makes sense. So yeah, it was.
And none of this put you off selection ultimately. So
No.
talk us through the decision to commit to it and how the experience unfolded.
Yeah, so I 1986, I decided that enough was enough really for Arbroath, and being a keen map reader, and I class myself as being quite a good map reader. So for me, SAS Selection is they do two a year, one in the winter and one in the summer. And for me, because of the Falklands, the cold weather and that lot, and the Norway side of it, the obvious choice really is to do a winter course, because again the mentality is you can, if you're cold, you can always warm yourself up by running a bit quicker. Whereas if you're really hot, it's quite difficult to cool down, if that makes sense. So I did a winter course, and bizarrely, I was doing really well on it on the initial, and the first bit of selection. People assume running up and down hills is actually the hardest part of selection, but it is. It isn't. It's just a means of actually trying to get an individual who is self motivated. And what happened was in 1986 winter, they had the worst weather conditions in memory, to the extent that they actually cancelled test week, which is really unusual and quite bizarre. So test week of the first bit of selection, the first 4 weeks, is a series of route marches over a 6-day period. They get longer, kilometre wise, miles wise, and your backpacks get heavier, if that makes sense. And obviously finishing with actually quite a long endurance, they call it the endurance route, which is actually quite a long thing. Normally takes about 20 hours to complete. So on the second route of the 6 days that we were doing, was out on a place called Elan Valley, and unfortunately the weather hadn't improved at all. So having cancelled that week, um, they then decided, listen, weather's not improved at all. We're just going to go for it. And on the second route that we did, I was unfortunate enough to be called off the vehicle first, which meant that I was going to be trailblazing, if that makes sense. And bear in mind that the snow was up to your crutch. So with the weight and stuff, and so off I went, and young lad, determined, blah 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 blah. Got 3/4 of the way round, and the chief instructor was at a checkpoint that I got to, and he advised me to step off he said, "Listen, just step to one side, get yourself a nice cup of tea, and allow 2 other people to overtake me, and then trailblaze, and then just get into their footsteps, if that makes sense. So make life easy for yourself." I totally ignored the advice, as you do. Yeah, I'm fine. So carried on, and all I remember is going up to the final checkpoint, because this is going to be the final checkpoint. And then I woke up in a helicopter, and it was a really bizarre sort of feeling, to be one minute on the ground, running around like a lunatic, to waking up in a helicopter. And what had happened was, I got to the final checkpoint, took my Bergen off, and this was actually told to me by the instructor, and he said, "Yeah, what I did was I gave you the next grid reference, which was down to the finish point, and literally it was all downhill." And he said, "You acknowledged it. You then put my Bergen on." So the instructor's Bergen was on the side of him. I put his Bergen on my back, and then ran in exactly the opposite direction to what he said to go. So he sort of tackled me, got me sorted out, and next thing I'm in a helicopter, and I think it was just pure exhaustion, cold, and everything. I was just it all sort of came upon you. So when I was in the sick bay that night, because I'd done really well, I hadn't had any warnings, or gypsies warnings, as they call it. Because you're allowed one gypsies warning. If you're slightly under the time that they give you, you're allowed one warning. I hadn't had any of them, and I thought, this is my gypsies warning. But this training major came in and said, "Listen, we've spoken to the doctor. They're recommending that you don't continue." And it's the worst feeling I've ever felt, even worse than not being picked for Lincoln City, if that makes sense. My world just shattered, because all I ever wanted to do was pass this selection. So it was, yeah, very, very dark period, for the 2 days that I was recuperating, watching all the guys continue doing the selection phase, knowing full well that I was packing my kit and headed back up to Scotland, up to Arbroath, and devastating time.
How did you bounce back from that? Because I'm guessing the only other major rejection of that size that you'd had in the past was football, and then you filled that gap with the paras. I'm assuming not being able to parachute was disappointing, but not quite the same existential, cursing the universe level of distraught. So what was your emotional reaction, and then how did you get that under control to take action to go again?
Yeah. So bizarrely, when I got back to Arbroath, about a week later, um, I actually met a lady, who became my future wife. And I think, it's true what they say. If you've got a good lady behind you, it can rebuild your confidence and everything else. So I met Kim, who later became my wife, and the mother of my 4 children. And we started a relationship, I suppose. So my intention was to literally go straight back on the summer course, and not dwell, because I think the longer you dwell on summer, it has more of an impact. So for me, it was right. I failed that, so I am now in 4 months' time. I'm going to go back on the summer course, and just crack on. But unfortunately, I met not unfortunately, fortunately, I met Kim, and we started a relationship. So my priority has slightly changed, because I wanted to build a relationship with this woman. I the urge to go straight back on selection wasn't there anymore. So I actually put off going back on selection by 3 years. And in that 3 years, I got married. And Kim actually was expecting our first child, Connor, who was born down in Plymouth. Because what the battery did, because they obviously knew that I was determined to go back on selection, they posted me down to Plymouth to as an instructor on the All Arms Commando course, which was for me a fantastic blessing in disguise, really. And it just gave me a bit more motivation, if that makes sense, to not only to help youngsters getting ready to do the commando course, but also in a sort of selfish way. It got me back up to speed mentally, to give SAS Selection another crack, if that makes sense. One thing I alluded to, I got told when I left for Paris, I got told you can't parachute. I I sneaked myself on a para course just after the Falklands. The battery was away somewhere, and the clerk obviously didn't know that on my record it was no parachuting. But anyway, he rang me up and said, "Oh, Mick, there's a para course during summer leave. Do you fancy doing it?" And I went, "Absolutely." Just so I went down there to Bryce Norton, did my para course, and then absolutely annoyed everybody when I got back to Arbroath, especially the medical centre, because they then had to remove no parachuting, because obviously when you join the SAS, not parachuting is not even an option. You have to be able to parachute. So that in between bit, and I suppose in a way that sort of it caught me out as being a bit of a rebel. I've always been a bit of a non-conformist, if that makes sense, and that really just compounded it. That yeah, okay, they said you can't do that, but hey, let's give it a bash anyway, and see how we and as it happened, I've done lots and lots of parachute jumps since then, and my ankles never ever, never given me any issues at all.
So it was a clerical error that got you through selection, not your own hard work or will or any of that stuff. Just a simple clerical error. That was all it was. I'm kidding, of course. But what a great turn of fate that turned out to be, because I'm sure that would have been a conversation once you got there. So second time around, selection hills obviously went well, but then you were on unknown territory in unknown territory, the jungle. How did you fare there before ultimately passing through into 22 SAS?
Yeah, again. So as I alluded to, Connor was born. Connor was actually about 5 days old when I went on selection. So the next time I saw him, he was 6 months old.
Wow.
Obviously because I had passed selection. But the jungle phase is by far. So I was very lucky on the hill phase this time, purely because I got to the start of test week with no injuries, no tweaks, no. And that's the aim of the game in SAS Selection. Get to test week with no injuries, you then give yourself a great chance of actually passing, if that makes sense. So we were flying, and it went really well. So and lucky enough really to pass. And I say lucky because there are a lot of people that fail SAS Selection, not because they're idiots or wasters or something like that. It's purely because their bodies give out, and they get injured, and stuff like that. Now, these people would make fantastic SAS soldiers without a shadow of a doubt, but they've been really unlucky and they get injured. So I always class that bit, that I was lucky enough to get through that bit, and then got to the jungle. Now, unfortunately, with the jungle, it's the hardest part of selection, bar none. Because not only is it physically demanding, it's mentally draining as well. And because of Connor, I had to put everything, Kim, my wife, my newborn son, I had to totally ignore that, because if you don't and you start thinking about family life, it puts you in a bad place, because the jungle is such an atmosphere, really, and you just need to be focused on getting yourself through selection. And I know that sounds very selfish, in a way, but it's just the way it is. You can't fanny about, really, and start thinking family, while you're preparing to do something in the jungle. And bizarrely, a lad came over to me one afternoon. We just finished, walk through the jungle, a run through the jungle, more like. But he came up to me and started talking, and tried to engage in family conversation. And I had no time for it at all, and said, "Listen, mate, you're talking to the wrong person. No interest." Unbeknown to me, I think this was a bit of a cry for help from him, because he was having second thoughts about whether or not he should stay there. And the next day, he actually handed all his kit in, and he was gone. He decided that it wasn't for him. Now,
Do you think there's anything you could have said to him that would have changed the outcome? Or do you think his mind was made up given the fact he was actually asking the question in the first place?
absolutely, yeah. I think he just wanted to get confirmation from someone else, that it wasn't the be all and end up. But unfortunately, I was the other way. It was, I'm not interested. And in a way, selfishly, I'm glad I actually didn't engage in conversation, because it is very off-putting. Your mind has got to be 100% on the job in hand in the jungle environment, and any distraction above that can be very detrimental to you passing or failing, if that makes sense. And again, it went really well, and unfortunately, we had a fatality in the jungle, and it wasn't one of the guys who was on selection. But we had an accidental shooting of one of the volunteers, military guy who volunteered to come over to Brunei to act as the enemy, and he was unfortunately accidentally shot and killed. So that was a bit of a culture shock, to be honest. That we're in a training environment, and all of a sudden we've got a fatality. But as it transpired, I soon got used to that, because the SAS, without a shadow of doubt, you train for realism, and you have to, if that makes sense. So you're doing everything right on that line of being fairly realistic, because the old adage, train hard, fight easy, comes to mind, if that makes sense. So it certainly wasn't the first and the last fatality that we were going to see in training, but unfortunately that's just the beast that you're in, and what you've volunteered for. But it was a bit of a culture shock, to be carrying a fatality off the training area, if that makes
I can
sense.
imagine. I can
Yeah.
imagine. And with the train hard, fight easy mentality, I think the story that you're potentially you've probably told the most, but the one that I think is best accounted for in terms of your career when you've had to apply your operational mindset to a situation you've been in that's now well known, is when you were captured in Bosnia with Billy Billingham. So why don't you just tell us about essentially what happened and how you felt your training kick in to navigate that situation?
Yeah. So me and Billy were in the same platoon, the same patrol in Bosnia. Just before Bosnia, I'd done 2 years over in Northern Ireland doing undercover work. So I've got quite long hair at the moment, but it was actually longer. And I had a big pirate gold earring in my ear. I used to get stopped at the airport flying back from Belfast, because I looked like a drug runner. To be honest, this big blonde hair, And the disappointment on the police and the customs when you used to pull out your army ID card to say, "Listen, I'm a good guy." But so having done that Northern Ireland undercover stuff for 2 years set me in good stead really for what was going to happen in Bosnia. So I missed all the build up to Bosnia, whereas Billy and the rest of the squadron did it's probably about a 2 month build up to deploying to Bosnia. And I missed all that. So Billy had been on a Serbo-Croat course to learn a bit of the language, if that makes sense, and so could speak a bit of it, not perfectly, but enough to get you by. Whereas I knew nothing. So when we ended up in a place called Bihać, which is on the western side of Bosnia, and it was an enclave, a Muslim enclave, and actually held out for the whole period of the war, uh, purely because they had a really strong General Dudakovic, and 5 corps Muslims army were actually pretty well thought of, if that makes sense, because they were led well. So when I got out there, joined up with Billy and the 2 other lads, because there was 4 of us. We just went about our job as you normally do, but because we were part of the UN, we just didn't look and dress like the UN. And the reason being is you can't do your job, getting intelligence and stuff like that if you're part of the UN. So we used to use the UN as yeah, that's our cover, but ultimately we need to get home and do our job, if that makes sense. And we just so we didn't wear helmets, the ballistic helmets, body armor. You don't wear that. And the mentality is that if you're speaking with frontline troops, they don't have ballistic helmets and they don't have body armor. So you need to have a bit of kudos about you, if that makes sense, and a bit of respect both ways. So you turning up with all your fancy kit on, it didn't wash. So we tended to get away with that. So we were tasked to set up a meeting between 2 generals, General Dudakovic from the Muslim, and a general from the Serb military, and it was in no man's land, near a place called Sanski Mosque. So people that have been there will know the area. And the day before we went and did our recce, me and Billy went up there to have a look, and we actually went down and spoke to the frontline troops of the Serbs and had a good crack with them. Had a nice cup of coffee, and everything was hunky dory. Then the day of the meeting, so the generals came in. The light infantry had a big warrior vehicle across the road in no man's land. And then a kilometre beyond that was the Serb front line. And me and Billy, because we got bored, as you do, we got bored of the meeting. So we decided to take a walk down and have another cup of coffee with the Serbs. Unbeknown to us, that because the general had been brought forward, the frontline troops had changed, and they'd brought their special forces type organisation down. So me and Billy sort of walking down there, looking nothing like UN, spooked them somewhat. So they actually took us prisoner. Now me and Billy, all we had was pistols, sidearms, and so there's no way we could have made a fight of it. When you're surrounded by 8 or 9 Serbs with AK-47s, you're just gonna put your hands up, if that makes sense, and that's what happened. So they gave us a quick interrogation in a house, and then decided that we needed to be taken back way behind the lines to a place called Prijedor, so 45-minute drive. Now, me and Billy were put in the back of the vehicle, and the only bit of kit on us was our maps that they'd taken off us, and notebooks. And both our maps and both our notebooks had nothing in. They were sterile. There was nothing to indicate who we were. if that makes sense. The only other bit of kit that we had was our ID card, and our ID cards were pretty much exactly the same, apart from one number was slightly different. So Billy had, 178, and mine was 179. And we'll come into that when it comes to the interrogation. So we got driven back, and bizarrely, I don't know if it's nervous energy or whatever, but we were sort of whispering to each other on the back seat of this 4x4. So we got a major who ended up being our interrogator, was the driver, and this big burly bull of a guy, Serb, was in the passenger seat with an AK-47. Me and Billy were on the back seat chatting away, whispering, and all of a sudden the guy in the passenger seat span round, and then cocked his AK-47 in our faces. Now, ordinarily, you'd probably poop your pants, but me and Billy looked at each other and put two and two together and thought, how come he hasn't cocked his weapon? He's on the front line. So we started laughing, nervous sort of laughter, which really did annoy this individual, because he's pointing an AK at these two lunatics that are now laughing at him. But it wasn't because we were laughing at him. We were just laughing at this, he should have had a weapon. He should have had a round in his thing. So that didn't bode too well for how we were going to be treated at the other end. So we 45 minutes later we got to this camp, and it was quite a famous camp because it was on TV all the time, because it's where they were stripping prisoners and Muslims. They were starving them. So these pictures of emancipated sort of skinny Muslims was where they took us, basically. And so I got dragged in first for interrogation by this major who spoke perfect English. So started chatting away. Now, because I've been in Northern Ireland, I knew the score when it comes to having a cover story. So my cover story, which was fairly true, was that I'd only been there 2 weeks. So I said, "Listen, I've only been here 2 weeks. I know nothing. I'm the new boy." Um, and they said, "Oh, what do you do?" And I went, "I'm just a driver." And that was a slight lie, because Billy was actually the driver. And I said, "Listen, I'm a driver. I know nothing." So they, after about half an hour of trying to get something out of me, and they got nothing, they threw me in the corridor and sort of left me there. Picked up Billy, and then Billy got dragged in for interrogation. Now Billy made the mistake of speaking a bit of Serbo-Croat, so they put two and two together and thought Billy was the clever one, and Mr. Thicky, the driver outside, knows nothing. So unfortunately for Billy, because they came up with that idea, he got dragged in about 4 or 5 times for interrogation, whereas they never spoke to me again. And the big bully boy that pointed his weapon, he was quite intimidating. He was sort of kicking you in the shin, and with his AK was sort of poking you in the ribs. He then pulled out a knife and was sort of threatening. All the sort of normal intimidatory sort of stuff, but again, not a big deal. You expect all that to go on anyway, so it wasn't a major drama. But poor old Billy was getting dragged in, and he got dragged in about 4 or 5 times. And then after about 4 hours, we ended up next to each other in the corridor, and sort of Billy leant over and went, "Flipping hell, Mick, what did you tell them?" And again, it was a bit of a funny moment, but sorry, Billy, but I just told him that I'm the driver. And Billy looked at me and went, "Yeah, but I'm the driver." But it was, looking at each other, it's a snooze, you lose type scenario. I went in there first and just told him I'm the driver, so knew nothing. But I did suggest to Billy that maybe you're talking a bit too much, which is probably why they're taking an interest in you, if that makes sense. So this went on, and then obviously the other two people that were left behind, they found out obviously that we'd been taken prisoner, and the way we got released was brilliant. Was they got on the sat phone to General Smith, I think, at the time, who then said, "Listen, don't worry about it. Go straight into the meeting now." And this annoyed all the other UN people. Go into the meeting and threaten to arrest the Serbian general. And that if he doesn't get Mick and Billy released, he's going to be taken prisoner and taken back to Bihać. And the thought of a Serbian general going back to a Muslim enclave, he absolutely pooped his pants. And he got on the sat phone straight away. We then got released about 2 hours later. We then got sort of passed through the system. They gave us all our weapons back and maps and everything else. And that was it. Now, walking back, Billy said to me, "Do you think we'll get kicked out because of what's happened?" Well, literally 2 weeks before, I'd been given the Queen's Commendation for bravery for doing operations in over in Northern Ireland. And I said to Billy, to be quite frank, they're hardly likely to honour you 1 minute and then next minute throw you out through something that wasn't really our fault, I suppose. And we kept it really quiet. We didn't make a song and dance about it. We didn't make a drama out of it. The only people that knew that we'd been captured were the other two people in the patrol, plus the squadron commander, because he had to know about it, and the general, and maybe one or two other people. So when Billy became famous on his TV show Who Dares Wins, he alluded to the fact that he'd been taken prisoner, been captured, and he had. But unfortunately, a lot of the B Squadron lads that we were in Bosnia with didn't know, because we didn't make a drama out of it. So they were ringing him up saying, "Hold on, Billy, I think you're telling porkies here, because you've never been captured." And he went, "Actually, yeah, we have,
Kept that one quiet, didn't you?
It is, and I spoke to my kids about it, and it was just that era where you just didn't make a song and dance about it. It was one of them things that happened, and you just roll with it, and they just the next day was just a normal day,
The show got people looking for things to call out as well, didn't it? In terms of how SF were to be presented to the public. So I think there was, he had to make sure he was squeaky clean and telling no lies in that circumstances. But we'll move on from that, because that conversation's been done to death on the internet. But you've touched on it a little bit before. Your time with 14 Intelligence Company, the DET in Northern Ireland, obviously significant part of history to be in amongst, and in the capacity that you were in, must have been an interesting way of interacting with the conflict. And just keen to hear a bit more about what your objectives were and how you interacted with things. And I'm curious to know more about Q cars specifically, because they were very important for your operations in many ways, weren't they?
Yeah, well, I must admit, when I went to Northern Ireland doing the undercover bit, it changed my perception of Northern Ireland, because when I first went to Northern Ireland as a youngster, the Catholics were the bad people, and the Protestants were the good guys, because you know nothing else, if that makes sense, and that's what's embedded in the young soldiers at the time. Not realizing, I suppose, that there are bad people on both sides. And when we were doing the undercover stuff, it was very evident that a lot of our work was actually against the Protestants, because there are bad people on both sides. So it was a mishmash of working against the IRA and also the Protestant groups as well. And that was the most satisfying part of the job, is that there was no distinction between, just because of a religious side of it. If you was a bad person carrying a gun, it didn't matter what religion you were going to get it. if that makes sense. And it was a good eye opener. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I found, because I've got this bit of a rebellion streak about me. A lot of the good intel that I actually produced was doing things not by the book. If that makes sense. And because at the time we didn't have vehicles that had trackers on. You had a tracker on your person. If something was to happen, but your car didn't have a tracker on it, which was great for people that have got a bit of a suspicious mind when you're trying to get other intelligence. It was great. We call it the rogue side of it, and a lot of the stuff that we got was actually by a rogue operator going off the grid somewhat to get intelligence. And a quick story was, we were due to do a close target recce CTR on a house in a staunch Republican area in Belfast. And that afternoon, we were also on a surveillance serial. So we was in our cars following a target. And then before we lifted off, we'd been told, and bear in mind that I was going to be one of the two people that was going to be breaking into this house. So I just wanted to make sure, because Special Branch from the IUC had insisted that this house was empty. And I always had my doubts, if that makes sense. So I pretended, so I had a clipboard, pulled away from the rest of the team. The rest of the team were doing something, but I then, because we were in that area, I then sort of stopped, parked up, went walkabout, as you do, with a clipboard, and I just took the number of the house of the street behind the target house, if that makes sense. Knocked on the door, not expecting anyone to answer, because we've been told the house is empty, blah 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 blah, and shock horror, quite a senior IRA individual opens the door, Mr. Grumpy, and I said, "Listen, in my nice English accent, can you tell me where blah blah street is?" And he said, "It's the street behind here, not this one." "Oh, okay then. Oh, sorry, mate. Yeah, blah, blah, blah," and off I went. Now, the reason I spoke English, and not, there's a lot of people assume that you should try and learn the a Belfast accent. You try and do a Belfast accent to a Belfast national, he'll suss you out instantly, as being a bit of a prat trying to. So I used to, I spoke English, because ultimately there were quite a few English people, Brits, working in Belfast. Not military, the normal sort of workers that are out there doing the job. And we also had Queen's University, so quite a few Brits there as well. So I just made I'm going to speak English and sod it, if that makes sense. And as it happens, if you were pinged, people were a bit suspicious about you, and they would try and engage in conversation. You could see the relief that you were speaking English, because their biggest concern was you were either a Catholic or a Protestant in a Protestant or a Catholic
So if
area.
you were in the middle, you weren't a threat.
Absolutely. And I certainly didn't look like a squaddy. My nickname.
You look like a drug runner, as you said.
Well, my nickname in the regiment was Jesus or Custer. Can you go and tell Colonel Custer to get his hair cut, or go and ask Jesus? Because it was just, you can see it's fairly white now, but it was mega blonde hair, if that makes sense. So I
What happened to the IRA man that opened the door? Because I'm sure he wasn't thrilled to have revealed himself in such a capacity.
No, absolutely. But it was good intel. But trying to get that back, trying to explain how I saw this guy coming out the door was actually quite difficult, because ordinarily you can't go and knock on target people's doors, if that makes sense. It's not the done thing. if that makes sense. So I alluded to the fact that I drove past accidentally, and he just happened to be on the doorstep. And thankfully, we did do that because we would have broken into that house that night, and if it had spooked us, it could have ended up quite dodgy, to say the least. But
I can imagine.
thoroughly enjoyed the trip out there. And what I found out was SAS guys that do surveillance are quite aggressive, um, purely because of the nature of your background, if that makes sense. So they don't make the best surveillance people, because they are a bit they're a bit RoboCop minded. I'm going to get that. You lock onto a target and away you go. Whereas surveillance over there is slightly different. And I've done surveillance in the UK, and it's totally different because your third part.
Yeah. What did your work with MI5 look
Yeah,
like?
well,
Because you did a little bit later on, didn't
yeah,
you?
well, I mean that's totally different because when you're following somebody in London, you don't have the same. We call it third party awareness. So other people being aware of what other people look at you as doing. Because if your third party awareness is not up to speed in Northern Ireland, you're going to get yourself killed, because you're in these hard nationalist estates or the Shankill Road, where the hardcore Protestants are. You're following people. And if you spook somebody else, you're going to get yourself killed, or you're going to get somebody else killed, if your third party awareness is not on the ball. Whereas in London, slightly different, because you don't have that same problem. So I found MI5 work in London a lot more chilled out and relaxed, as opposed to following hardcore terrorists, carrying weapons in Northern Ireland. Totally different.
So how did you adjust to transitioning into a instructor position after years of excitement and the stress and things you need to consider on a daily, moment by moment basis that you've just described? How did you transition into being an instructor at Hereford?
Yeah, bizarrely, I have a lot of empathy, surprisingly, and I think having 4 kids as well, helps you in that way. And I just found out on my days on the Commando course, where I was an instructor on the All Arms course down there, that I enjoyed helping people that were struggling. I took as a personal challenge to make sure that we can get this individual, as opposed to a lot of mentality of, no, let's get rid of him, and we'll, which I think is wrong. So I thoroughly enjoyed it, trying to, and bear in mind that we do a lot of shooting, on the training side of it. And it was trying to get people, who were not SAS. They were going to be going to Northern Ireland, but having to get them up to the same standard shooting, as an SAS trooper. And the learning curve is like that, because normal Green Army people, when they learn pistol shooting, they're on the range, all stood next to each other, and they fire 5 or 6 rounds, and that's it for the year. All of a sudden, we are firing thousands of bullets on a daily basis, and running down streets and coming out of cars. And so it was actually quite a dangerous job, if that make not for myself, but for the students. Because if they get it wrong, and bear in mind that, there's 3 elements to learning surveillance, I suppose, or joining 14 intelligence. Close target recce, which is breaking into farms and breaking into houses and stuff like that. CQB, close quarter battle, shooting, and different scenarios and situational awareness, and surveillance. Now, on the surveillance and the CQB side of it, if you get it wrong, um, you're going to get a slap on the wrist, or you'll fail the course. You get it wrong on the ranges, you're going to get someone killed, or you're going to get someone else killed. So, although it was a nice 2 years chilled out trying to get people up to speed. It was actually quite a serious and very challenging time, if that makes sense, to make sure that these people were fully up to speed to go on operations, because there's no leeway. As soon as you say, yeah, this individual is good to go, he's then put straight into Northern Ireland on the streets working against hardcore terrorists. So you had to get it right, if that makes sense.
Yep, valuable in and of itself, I'm sure. And there's a whole load that we haven't had a chance to go through, such as your work with schools and transition to civilian life and the rural security stuff that you do. But I feel it would be remiss of me not to say that a lot of this is summarised and detailed in your book, Life on the Edge. So if you just want to explain a little bit about, I mean, even the process that you've gone through personally writing it, and more importantly, what people can expect from it, so that they can follow on their intrigue and go and grab themselves it.
Yeah, so 2 years ago, I had a light bulb moment. I was head of security over in The Hague, and I just thought, I don't want to do this for the rest of eternity. So I decided to come back, write a book. But the book, so it's not a Bravo 20 type book. It's a book about having challenges like the football, slapping your ankle, of hitting challenges in your life, and then how to get around it using my own experience, if that makes sense, being captured, blah blah blah. So it was the important thing was getting the right person to write the book, and I got in touch with a girl called Nicole Johnson, who unfortunately died about 3 weeks ago, and she went through a real bad illness just before the book was going to go to publisher. So we'd done literally 18 months work, these type of meetings, recordings and everything else. So she'd done all the work. Now Nicole is a left winger, feminist. She used to work for Gordon Brown when he was in office. So the last person you would ever think would write an SAS book. And the meeting that we had initially was for her to say, Mick, I'm not the person for you. But as soon as I started talking about how I wanted the book to go, she was hook, line, and sinker on it. She thought, what a fantastic, different approach to an SAS book, if that makes sense. All about helping other people. So we managed to get the book done, and at the moment, because she got cremated about a week ago now, so it's still fairly fresh. But her parents, who are from Australia, they came over, and they've given me their blessing to try and get somebody to finish a book, if that makes sense, and get it all in the same way that she wrote it. Purely because it's my life story, but it's also a tribute to the way she wrote it, which is what we want to do. But on the back of the book, me and my daughter, bear in mind I've got 3 boys in the military, and my daughter, who's the youngest of the children, she's got the same mentality. She walked up Ben Nevis at the age of 7, which is no mean feat, to be quite frank.
Nope.
She set up climbing ropes at the age of 9, top roping, set them up, and also jumped off testing them, because that's what you do. If you set the ropes up, you're going to jump off, and you're going. So she's got quite a robust mentality. So we got her into teaching the breakaway stuff, and also the restraint training, because when you're teaching children and females specifically, they relate to Keeley more than me, if that makes sense. So I do the scary bit as to why people need to be a bit more switched on now. And the company's called Hawkes and Co. We're a new entity. We're just getting started. We were in Aldershot last week, teaching youngsters who are vulnerable. But I was informed by the head teacher that some of the children they're not allowed into mainstream schooling. That they've got personal issues and stuff like that. So it can be quite difficult to teach in. And my response was, if you can teach an SAS squadron, you can teach anybody. And to be quite frank, the kids were better behaved than a lot of the SAS squadrons that we've taught, if that makes sense. But the teachers have now asked us to go back to teach the restraint training. Because the one thing that we don't do woke at all. Because when you're teaching people how to look after themselves, there's no woke in there at all. And the teachers specifically said to us, all the training that they've done is all been hands off. Well, some of the teachers have actually been hurt because you can imagine some of these 16-year-old kids are actually quite big people. You know, they're young adults, if that makes sense. So some of the smaller teachers have actually been hurt trying to apply the woke restraint stuff that they've been taught. So they've asked us specifically to go back and do the non-woke stuff, if that makes sense. And as we saw in Wales last week, 13-year-old with a knife is actually quite a potent weapon, and wokeness doesn't work. So hopefully we'll get there. We're also getting into the rural farm security because having broken into farms in Northern Ireland, we know just about.
You know what to look out for.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the old poacher turned gamekeeper. But again, with the farmers, it's all about changing that mindset because the weakest link in a farm security are the farmers. You know, it's not anything else. It's the farmers need a culture, and without that culture, nothing works.
Well, very sorry to hear about Nicole, but as you said, I'm sure the book, when it comes into existence, will be a fantastic testament to the work done. I believe best place for updates and things is your website, which will be linked down below, which is Hawkes & Co. Really enjoyed that, Mick. Thank you very much for insights on what has been an illustrious career, and I'm sure we've only scratched the surface on all the stories that you've got to tell. But we'll save that for another time. Thank you very much, and just a reminder for everyone to check out the link down below so you can see when the book is going live, as a fitting testament to your life and Nicole's at this point. So thank you again.
Pleasure.